Lochani, Molo, Sawubona, Dumela, Absheni, Nda, Groetnis. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. As we conclude Heritage Month, it gives me great pleasure to greet you in South Africa's 11 official languages as we celebrate the rich diversity and uniqueness of our rainbow nation. I am Brian MacArthur, the Acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Head of the College of Law and Management Studies. It is my honor to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of my colleague, Professor Irene Govender. I have had the pleasure and privilege of working with Professor Govender as a national examiner, colleague in information systems and technology, and as a co-supervisor of a PhD student. So I'm delighted to be part of this auspicious occasion. Our Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Professor Nanapoku, extends his sincere apologies for being unavailable today. He conveys his congratulations to Professor Govender and his regards to her well-wishers in attendance today. It is also my pleasure to welcome our esteemed guests, members of the Executive Management, members of Senate, our inaugurand this afternoon, Professor Irene Govender, to whom we extend our heartiest congratulations, family, colleagues, and friends of Professor Irene Govender, in particular, her immediate family, husband, Professor Desmond Govender, her two sons, Stanton and Josh, her daughter-in-law, Cherise, and the latest addition to the family, granddaughter, baby Ariella. Also to our staff, students, and alumni, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Inaugural lectures form part of the university's public lecture series and may only be presented by newly appointed full professors, and they celebrate the attainment of the pinnacle of an academic career. These lectures present an opportunity for showcasing the exciting and groundbreaking research and teaching being carried out by professors in our university, and are a significant milestone in an academic's career, providing official recognition of their promotion or appointment to full professorship. These lectures are furthermore an ideal opportunity for new professors to introduce themselves and to present an overview of their own contribution to their field, to academic peers, students, and research collaborators. Inaugural lectures are also a platform for celebrating a professor's academic achievements with her family, friends, mentors, and colleagues. Colleagues, this unprecedented time in history is characterized by exponential and disruptive change. Our worldwide network of economic activities, commercial transactions, and professional interactions is no longer exclusively in the hands of formal structures or suited to incidental learning. The world we live in requires constant upskilling, reskilling, and new modes of thinking, particularly in the digital realm. We salute Professor Govender for her contributions in this arena. My appreciation once more for joining us. I look forward to Professor Govender's presentation on computational thinking, as the topic is highly relevant to our current circumstances. It is now my pleasure to hand over to my colleague, Professor Stephen Mutula, Dean and Head of School in the School of Management, Information Technology and Governance, who will introduce Professor Govender more fully. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor and privilege to introduce to you the inaugurand, Professor Irene Govender. Professor Govender commenced her working life as a high school teacher of mathematics and computer studies after having obtained a teaching diploma from Springfield College of Education While teaching, she obtained the Bachelor of Science degree from the University of South Africa, majoring in mathematics and computer science. During her tenure as lecturer of computer science at the Springfield College of Education, she completed the Bachelor of Science honors degree at the University of Durban-Westville and the Master of Science degree at the University of South Africa, specializing in artificial intelligence. Professor Govender was seconded for a short period of time to University of South Africa during the incorporation of colleges to universities in the capacity as a curriculum advisor for the discipline. Professor Govender joined the University of Natal in the School of Mathematics, Science and Technology Education in 2002. After having obtained her PhD in minimum time, she joined the School of Information Systems and Technology as a senior lecturer, appointed associate professor in 2016, and then full professor in 2019. Professor Govender enjoys international recognition in her field as an established NRF-rated researcher. Her research interests are interdisciplinary, specializing in the fields of programming, ICT for development, learning with the technology, and more recently, big data analytics. She has published over 70 peer-reviewed publications in the field of computing in a wide range of journals, some of which are in quartile 1 categories. Moreover, she has presented at more than 30 international conferences, as well as been an invited plenary and keynote speaker. She has supervised over 30 honors students and graduated more than 10 PhD and master's students from the African continent. She has served as a reviewer for several NRF committees, including Women in Science, and as well as over 20 international journals and conferences, including her role as part of the program committees for conferences such as South Africa Computer Lecturers Association, IC Softcomp. Professor Govender has developed and taught a range of modules, including advanced systems design, programming, mobile app development, security for information systems, and research methodology for information systems and technology. She was appointed chief examiner for the Matric Senior Certificate for the Information Technology for several years. By virtue of her expertise in the computing and education field, several institutions and organizations have sought advice on various aspects from Professor Govender. To name a few, the witness called upon her to comment on the standardization of computer programming language for schools. And she was also requested by the Senate Publication Committee of the University of South Africa to assess theses for publication awards, selected as part of the panel to assess and review the computing program at the universities of Ghana, and was appointed moderator of Bachelor of Science degree honors for London Metropolitan University in the United Kingdom. She has also worked in collaboration with Utrecht University in the Netherlands and Northwest University on projects for programming with teachers and other stakeholders, such as International Business Machine. Presently, Professor Govender serves as external examiner for several national and international universities for PhD theses, to name but a few: the University of Hong Kong, the University of London, and the University of Mauritius. Professor Govender was appointed academic leader of one of the largest disciplines, information systems and technology in the university, for the past 6 years, and served in various committees at the university. She draws on her expertise and experience in the field of computer science, education, and information systems, and therefore brings a multidisciplinary perspective a particular strength to the discipline, school, and the university in her research and in designing and enacting the modules. She believes that teaching, learning, and research is a joint venture. As part of her legacy, Professor Govender, as an academic leader of her discipline, was able to cultivate a culture of collegiality and friendship across all colleagues within the discipline. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, it is my privilege and honor to invite Professor Govender to deliver her inaugural address on the topic, Life in the Digital Era, Enhancing Computation Thinking. Professor Govender. Professor Govender, you are muted.
Thank you, Professor Mutula, for the introduction and the kind words. The DVC, Professor MacArthur, the Dean, Professor Mutula, fellow colleagues, students, friends, and family. It is indeed an honor and privilege to address you almost 18 months later. Before I present this lecture, there are just a few acknowledgements that I wish to make, and so that I do not forget. To my colleagues who have provided the supportive structure to make my academic journey worth it and successful, particularly the staff in the discipline of IS&T. I thank my students, both past and present, and who have been willing to work to the high standards set and published by contributing to the overall academic culture. Last but not least, I thank my precious family for their unending support to this point in my career. My husband, Des, my two sons, Stanton and Joash, and my daughter-in-law, Cherise, and not forgetting my joy that his baby, Ariella, has brought into my life. And I thank God, without whom I am nothing, for his grace and strength is sufficient. Now turning to my lecture, I will just give you a brief background of my journey in academia to give you some context to my research. Right. So my interest in computational thinking has been via my interest in programming and problem solving, and how it has influenced thinking towards computational thinking, which first emerged way back in the 80s. For a large part of my career, I've been involved in teacher education, as noted in the introduction, specializing in computer science. So while my master's research involved neural networks and default reasoning, a subfield of AI, it was inevitable that programming for teachers would become a dominant aspect of my research as I began to teach different programming languages over the years. So when I joined the School of IS&T, the socio-technical field emerged as a complementary field within the discourse of my research, including ICT for development. So a lot of my research has been about understanding how teachers or students learn programming with a view to improve the pedagogy of teaching programming and influence problem solving and logical thinking in general. So it is not unexpected that my attention should now turn to computational thinking, a 21st century skill. So I'll begin by describing the origin of computational thinking positioning computational thinking in Seymour Papet's work with Logo, explain its importance for students in today's labor force and how it meets programming and AI. I will then go on to present a global overview of the work that has been carried out in the domain of computational thinking, and finally reflect on how we advance computational thinking. So in this presentation, I will generally use the term CT to refer to computational thinking. The genesis of computational thinking can be traced back to the renowned Professor Seymour Papet for his work in Logo programming in 1971. In fact, in that year, Seymour Papet published an excellent paper on teaching children thinking. At that time, computers were very expensive and were mostly used by the military and large industries. The role of computers in schools was mainly for administrative purposes and to help students with skills, but however, not to advance their knowledge through higher order thinking activities. So this is what he wrote in his paper. He says, the purpose of this essay is to present a grander vision of an educational system, which technology is something children themselves will learn to manipulate, extend, to apply to projects, thereby gaining a greater and more articulate mastery of the world, a sense of the power of applied knowledge, and self-confidently realistic image of themselves as intellectual agents. Now, this sounds quite very ordinary and commonplace, but in 1971, this was just a vision that in all probability could not happen. So to put this powerful machine or a technology in the hands of children was incredible at that time. Why would he want to do that? So when questioned about his vision, he said, to give students, or rather children, a greater and more articulate mastery of the world, a sense of power of applied knowledge, and a self-confidently realistic image of themselves as intellectual agents. Now remember, this was way back in 1971, the start of the Logo project. So those of you who can remember that far along, Logo as a programming language was taught in schools, developing logical thinking and problem solving in coding a robot. Some of you should be able to recall the Logo turtle. Actually, I was inspired by thinking that Seymour Papet used in the development of a Logo and the impact that Logo had on students when I did teach it way back in the 90s. He demonstrated how children could use the programming language Logo that he had developed to control robot turtles, to move the robots forward and backward a specified distance, to turn right or left a specified degree, to drop a pen and draw. Now, at its most basic, Logo is an environment that enables students to program an on-screen turtle to create geometric shapes. But at its most sophisticated, it is a tool that enables students to explore, problem solve, experiment, and become immersed in an environment in which they take complete control or charge of the computer. So it was only when Jeanette Wing, the former vice president of Microsoft Research, published a seminal paper on computational thinking in 2006, did research on computational thinking gain momentum. Since then, an increasing number of studies on computational thinking with its relevance and roots embedded in the computing curricula have been published. Now you may ask, why is CT so important, or how has it emerged as a 21st century skill? Well, in the new global economy, digital technology is central to the labor market. Hence, solving unusual problems in the current era of digital technology is a key competence in a world full of changes. Our current students will go on to live a life greatly predisposed to IT, if not already. And many will work in areas that involve or are impacted by IT. So the unprecedented advancement of technology and its various forms of communication via the internet have not only permeated our lives in so many respects and ways, but is hugely impacting the digital economy. So for example, in healthcare, computing is part of the operating rooms every day. And it is enabling breakthroughs like the contact lenses that detect levels of insulin for people with diabetes. And in space, for example, we are depending on a generation of robots to explore where humans cannot now. In our homes, we are automating everything like our heating system and our lighting system, and even the use of robots to clean our floors or carpets. On our road travels, we depend on navigation systems to get us home. And now we are experimenting with bringing self-driving cars into our everyday life. Now, 10 to 15 years ago, one would not have thought that computational thinking could become so pervasive. This trend is growing across every single industry, and it certainly has implications for our students and the labor market, which in turn should impact our education and curriculum. So you may ask, why now are we bringing so much attention to CT, besides the examples that I've just indicated? From a pragmatic perspective, or a technical perspective, if we just consider the change from the software side of life, to use the words of the renowned business analyst, software is eating the world. Example, the automotive industry is going through a fundamental change from mechanical to software. There is no need to mechanically change the way a car drives these days. All that is needed is the software that controls the mechanics of the car, whether it be a sports version or a standard version. So you can have the same engine in different models of cars. The only difference is the software that creates the difference. So the second point is both digital and analog are merging into one. For example, if we just take just one example, the purpose of a digital camera is to create a digital representation of the analog world. So in some instances, the digital and analog influence each other. Let's not forget the computer power. Most computers are equipped with a graphics processing unit, which we refer to as GPU, that handles the graphical output, including the 3D animated graphics used in computer games. The computing power of GPUs has increased rapidly, and they are now often much faster than the computer's main processor. So the massive amount of data that is generated from all sorts of media, whether you are browsing the net or conducting online shopping or interacting with the learning management system, these all call for thinking computationally to handle large amounts of structured and unstructured data. And here again, we can see the relationship or the link to data science and big data. So as research advances, algorithms are improving, which in turn leads to improved learning. So consider for a moment our current school curriculum or education. How many of you can answer these questions? What is photosynthesis? Or what water molecules are made up of? Or explain how the globe lights up. Students are expected to graduate high school knowing all of this. And to this set of knowledge, one should add CT skills. Just like they learn about photosynthesis, the digestive system, or electricity, every 21st century student should also have a chance to learn about algorithms, how to make an app, or how the internet works. In fact, the initiative to promote computational thinking as a support of many prominent public organizations like Microsoft, Facebook, and the world of technology in general supports the proposal that all students should learn some aspects of programming or coding. Right now, there's little expectation in our schools that students will even have a basic understanding of these concepts, even though they are driving a large part of our society. So the increasing rate of technology users or consumers far exceeds that of creators or digital innovators disproportionately. This imbalance can have some adverse effects on the labor market and consequently the digital economy. So this therefore calls urgent attention to the development of computational thinking. Hence, how do we close this disproportionate gap? And how do we know whether our students really possess the skill to meet the 21st century skill set? So as we move forward, let's just consider the following questions. What is computational thinking? What is the relationship between computational thinking, programming, and artificial intelligence? What is the status of computational thinking education globally? First, I'll begin by unpacking this concept of computational thinking. What is it? Computers think. It is not computer programming either, because computer programming tells the computer what to do and how to do it, and computers simply follows these instructions. So while there appeared to be minimal consensus on the definition of computational thinking in the literature, there is certainly agreement in the literature that CT involves decomposition, abstraction, pattern recognition, and algorithmic thinking. And at some given time, if you need to solve a problem, you may use all of these aspects or one or more, depending on the size and complexity of the problem. So when this is expanded, it entails the following. Decomposition means breaking down a complex problem or system into smaller parts and solving each part logically, organizing and analyzing data, and making deductions. If we look at the next part, abstraction is at the heart of CT. It's about managing complexity, that if you have something that is difficult and complicated, the idea is to make some difficult aspects, put it to one side, so we can worry about that later or get others to work on the details of that aspect. It is very much like going from ICT to computing. You put it into a black box, focusing on the important information only and ignoring the irrelevant detail for that time. Pattern recognition. You look at how people have solved similar problems, drawing on that experience, and look for similarities among and within problems. And algorithmic thinking, reformulating the problem into a series of ordered steps, a set of steps to achieve the objective. That is a set of instructions. And finally, generalizing this problem-solving process, trends and patterns into rules, principles, or insights to a wide variety of problems. After igniting the importance of computational thinking advocacy in 2006, 10 years later, Jeanette Wing defined computational thinking as the thought processes involved in formulating problems and their solutions, so that the solutions are represented in a form that can be effectively carried out by an information processing agent. Now, on examining this definition, two aspects emerge that are particularly significant for compulsory education. One, CT is a thought process, therefore can be independent from technology. And two, CT is a specific type of problem solving that entails distinct abilities. Example, being able to design solutions that can be executed by a computer, a human, or a combination of both. To the non-computer scientist, common sense computational thinking can be described as a way of thinking and of solving problems in a modern and technology-first world. So getting computers to help us to solve problems is really a two-step process. You think of the steps to solve a problem or the rules that govern the system. And then you use your technical skills to get the computer working on the problem. Now, CT is the first of these. It describes the concepts, the processes, and approaches we draw on when thinking about problems or systems in such a way that a computer is really that first stage that we ought to be concentrating on. And it's a lot of what we do in computing. For example, if you are going to write up something, you think of the idea, you think of the content, you gather the information, and then you think of the structure before you start typing it up. Now, computing is at its heart a creative subject. The best way to learn is to make something. And children learn by playing and experimenting with technology, in keeping with Seymour Papin's theory of learning, constructionism. However, this close affinity to computer science or IT does not necessarily follow that computational thinking is exclusively confined to this area. Having looked at the definition of computational thinking broadly, I'd now like to move on to briefly consider the relationship between computational thinking and programming. Now, coding and programming are often used interchangeably to indicate the process of writing instructions for the computer to execute. However, programming refers to the broader activity of analyzing a problem, designing a solution, and implementing it. Coding is a stage of implementing solutions in a particular programming language. Implementation skills go beyond coding, since they include debugging and testing. So in general, initiatives that are promoting computational thinking education use the trendier term coding. Now we know that one of the aspects of computational thinking is algorithmic thinking. So what is an algorithm? Algorithm is an unambiguous, precise, step-by-step guide to solve a problem or achieve a particular objective. Programming may be broadly regarded as a two-step process, right? A set of steps to solve a problem, its algorithm followed by code. It is how you solve the problem that involves the creative thinking and how to achieve the solution. You then have the task of making that thoughts come into action by translating that algorithm into a set of symbols according to the computation system that you are using. That is the language and the syntax that you refer to it in programming. Both are hard, but both require creativity. If you use an analogy of, let's say, poetry, translating poetry is difficult, but so is writing poetry. The analogy might be a flawed one, but if you think of the algorithm as coming up with the idea of the poem, think of the coding as translating that into a particular target language. You have to know the grammar, the syntax, the vocabulary, and all of those spelling and punctuation grammar. It is difficult to separate the two parts. In programming, we can get the learners to think of steps to solve the problem. Ask another to translate into code using the system rules in place called the language or syntax. If these two steps are completely separated, one loses a lot of the fun and enjoyment. And if those of you who have been working with program, you'll understand the joy that you get when you solve a problem. If you do the algorithms without coding, you lose a lot of the fun. If you do the coding without the algorithm, you lose some creativity and reasoning. Both steps work hand in hand. So just as poetry is taught to students to create is taught to students not to create professional poets, you do it to engender an awareness and an appreciation for the particular form of language and artistic expression. So too, programming might be falling into that category. So one may ask then, why learn programming now? Or what is the purpose? Well, the best way to learn is by doing. And the practical experience of programming is almost certainly the best way for primary school pupils to learn about computing and computational thinking. So you might ask, where is the evidence of this? Well, from anecdotal evidence, and also the literature is beginning to show evidence of this statement that I've just made. So in this book called Mindstorms by Seymour Papert, this book which was written in 1980, he uses the invention of Logo, as I mentioned earlier, the first child-friendly programming language, to justify the value of teaching children with computers and thinking computationally. Making programming accessible to children using the Logo programming environment for novices developed creativity and computational thinking at that time. This had some key design features that are still present in modern programming languages for children. Papert's turtle robot is both physical and virtual, that's screen-based. The Logo commands for controlling it, example, forward and right, are body syntonic. That is, a child can step into the turtle's shoes to execute them. Thus, its movements on the floor or the screen provide visual feedback. So Logo is text-based. The first drag and drop block-based interface was introduced in 1996 with Logo blocks. That was a programming environment for an early prototype of Lego Mindstorms, which many of you will be familiar with this. So a move away from Logo programming has resulted in a more recent block-based programming environments like Alice, which you see on the top there, and Scratch environment, you see on the bottom of the slide, which feature multiple screen avatars. Both tools allow novices to focus on creating and experimenting, as they do not require the learners to be able to code in a textual language. So moving on to look at how CT meets AI. I first consider what AI is. We have seen exciting and fascinating results in AI, which is really understanding, it's about really understanding how can we mechanize intelligence or thought processes or cognitions, and how do we leverage that when it comes to our own problem-solving abilities or capabilities. So I would argue that we can take advantage of the fact that we have extremely powerful computers when we solve problems. So what we really need to do is develop and cultivate our computational thinking and leveraging this computational power that exists while solving problems. So what is AI? For our purposes, I would say it is the study of algorithmic mechanization of cognition. That is, how do we think? How do we solve problems? How do we plan? How do we reason? And so on. So how do we get to understand it well enough? And our being able to write algorithms that can carry out the same kind of problem-solving processes. So we have seen in the examples mentioned earlier that quite good progress has been made. So why should we now be looking at these advances? First of all, software is taking over where we needed hardware, as explained earlier. CT really captures what we need to be good at in order to leverage all these artificial intelligence and computational tools that we have. So what's so interesting here is that as we learn more about AI, and as these tools are developed based on, for example, machine learning, we need to be able to leverage them through our computational thinking. By being able to understand how the computational processes work and how we can benefit from those when we solve problems. So what we see today is actually a number of interesting cases where people use machine learning or other tools as part of their own problem-solving processes. So referring back to Papitt's paper, he said, technology gives children a sense of the power of applied knowledge. Using the power of computing to make a meaningful social impact, kids are empowered to make an impact by doing activities situated in contexts that are personally relevant as well. I will just describe two examples for the sake of time about how children are able to use the computational power that they've been given. In the US, children from a middle school made an app to help dementia patients. It's called Formula. It's an app or system that reminds you to take your meds. Now, it is a simple app, but the point of this is that this was inspired by one of the girls as a tribute to her grandfather who has dementia. She said that she realizes that she has the ability to make something that is not only useful to her grandfather, but to anyone who needs this. Another example is the Dharavi girls from India. They were aged between 12 and 16, who lived in one of the poorest towns in India, a town that did not have water in their homes. People had to queue for water, and inevitably they would get into fights trying to secure a place in the queue. So the girls saw a need and created an Android app called Pani Water, or Pani, with their own designed logo as well. And these apps give them a notification when it is their turn to pull water, or for women in distress in those situations when the fights begin. So Pani app demonstrates that even people from the poorest communities can create apps to improve life for people around them. So in our world of AI, what skills should we be teaching our kids? Should not computational thinking skills be a core competence for all? So I'd like to now move on to consider the global status of computational thinking education and report on the findings of a snapshot of my study. Considering the ministries of education globally, the governments of many developed countries have implemented a computing curriculum that embraces CT as part of the mandatory course for schools. This curriculum has programming or coding as part of its content. And one of the key concerns in the UK was that the previous ICT curriculum had become imbalanced, with too much emphasis on basic digital skills at the expense of a deeper understanding of concepts. Now, if we could just focus for a moment on this table, we can see the countries that have implemented computational thinking as a compulsory education unit in the school curriculum. The table is not meant to be exhaustive or comprehensive, but it gives you an idea of what is happening globally. The piloting and revision of the implementation of computational thinking has been done in the years prior to what is indicated on the slide. England, as part of the UK, really was one of the first countries to include CT as part of the mandatory course in the school curriculum. as early as 2014. Interestingly, by the year 2018, all 50 states in the US had implemented computational thinking education in the school curriculum as policy. So this was first motivated and signed off by the previous two presidents because they saw the need for computational thinking for their children and for the future. So in countries like Ghana and Nigeria, there is commitment to include computational thinking as a mandatory aspect, but it has not yet become policy. In India, in the rural areas, computer science has become compulsory. So they have worked with CS Pathshala. It's an ACM initiative to bring a computing curriculum to the schools in India in 11 different states. And presently they are teaching it in the mathematics curriculum. So there is a huge drive to include all schools in this curriculum in India at the moment. While South Africa has a commitment to implement computational thinking into the school curricula, they have not yet successfully piloted the implementation, which was due to have started this year, 2021, in 1,000 schools. But more importantly, there is a huge challenge in South Africa to overcome. That is the infrastructure and teacher development knowledge. And here, universities have a role to play. In an attempt to embed computational thinking or computer science or coding in the school curriculum, this table summarizes the rationale for including computational thinking in the curricula across the globe. Now, most of the countries that are indicated here are in the European Union and a few that's outside. What is important to recognize here is that fostering logical thinking and problem-solving skills are the two most common reasons for including computational thinking in the compulsory curriculum, followed by other competencies and programming. To further determine the status of CT related to empirical studies, a systematic review methodology was employed to determine the trends of these studies. So a snapshot of the studies was extracted from January 2021 until July 2021. A short time frame because of the huge amount of research that generated in this area. And after examining these articles, only 44 articles were deemed appropriate for the current study. So the studies were examined for context, for content areas or interventions, variables, and their relationships with each other. So I synthesized this review with the existing ones to inform the global status of CT education and the empirical evidence of CT development. So I will just report on some key findings. To understand the status of CT implementation in institutions, the context of interventions in teaching CT were examined, right? Considering this table, it also shows that the studies were carried out in two main contexts, with the most common overall context being programming. We had the most number of studies there. While many studies associated CT with programming, other contexts were investigated to develop CT, more especially the STEM subjects, such as the science, the technology, engineering, and mathematics. So what is interesting is that CT was developed using unplugged activities in some studies successfully, which has implications for schools that do not have computing infrastructure, and more so in KZN. So studies that involve students from schools were mostly using Scratch, robot programming, and game design. There were few studies in non-programming content areas undertaken with K-12 students. This may be related to the need for programming applications to help students more easily gain problem-solving skills. Regarding university students, they have been involved more as research subjects in STEM subjects, and many students were teacher education students. And one of the findings was it was able to foster CT skills to boost economic growth, to fill job vacancies in ICT, and to prepare for future employment. The transfer of cognitive skills is key to the claims for introducing CT in compulsory curricula. And computer programming and robotic programming had a positive effect on CT skills. There were only 2 studies reported no significant relationship between programming and skills and CT skills. This may be related to the duration of the training or intervention, student interest, or quality of the course. So the effect of all the independent variables on CT skills is shown here in this diagram, namely interactive writing, web-mediated learning, tinkering, and algorithmic explanations. Non-programming independent variables such as the use of games were mostly used in studies which included problem-solving skills as well as CT. So the studies that included computer programming as an active independent variable examined the effects on all dependent variables, that is CT skills, problem-solving, and programming skills. Similarly, the use of robotics was also associated with most dependent variables. So some reflections on how we advance CT. We have determined from the studies examined that computational thinking is a skill that can be used in a range of disciplines and can benefit students studying in any area, whether it's through a dedicated course, an already existing subject, or just a once-off event. It can be done. There's no doubt that CT is important and must be developed early in our students. While there are many unplugged activities that can be used, it has been shown that programming is a natural vehicle to develop the skill. And in younger learners, use of robotic programming or coding as a buzzword can help to foster that. So the successful embedding of computational thinking concepts into the curriculum requires efforts in 2 directions. First, educational policy must be amended to cater to this need. And secondly, overcoming infrastructure hurdles, such as the need for teacher resources and teacher training. So in building problem-solving skills for students, the use of common real-world problem enhances their understanding to creatively think of the computational steps towards a solution. So it is important to design a learning tool that allows students to learn and teach programming concepts through CT approach. The storyline to the puzzle consists of a wolf, a goat, a cabbage, a farmer, a wolf, a goat, and a cabbage. So a farmer has to take all these items across a river, and the only boat available can transport the farmer and at most one of his possessions at a time. If left unattended, or if the wolf is left with the goat, the wolf will eat the goat. If the goat is left with the cabbage, the goat will eat the cabbage. So how did he do this? All right. I let you ponder on that, to think about it and apply your computational thinking. And it is unfortunate that there are no question and answer time in this lecture. So I'll leave you with this quote from Steve Jobs. Everyone in this country should learn how to program a computer because it teaches you how to think. Thank you. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can hear your real and virtual applause from wherever you are. We have been treated to an exploration of computational thinking, ranging from those wonderful early days of Logo across the full spectrum of applied technologies. Prof. Govender, you have also made an argument for building CT schools in the school curriculum and spoken with passion about programming, algorithms, and coding as always. I was particularly struck by the quotation, "Software is eating the world." It generates the common fear that technology is somehow taking control of the world and that humans have a subordinate role. Although there is no universally accepted definition of computational thinking, as you indicated, it is accepted as being distinctly human, as a specific thought process with emphasis on solving problems. So all is not lost. The message of hope is the emphasis on building these CT skills in students, especially at a young age, thus empowering people to drive technology, including AI. As a side note, I loved seeing tinkering as an independent variable in that study. On behalf of the College of Law and Management Studies, it is my honor to deliver the vote of thanks. I would like to begin by thanking each and every colleague, student, friend, and the family of Professor Govender for attending today. We acknowledge the contributions of the family in supporting Professor Govender on her journey. As a university, we value the role of loved ones who continue to support our staff as they make significant strides in progressing the university. I would also like to thank Prof. Mutula for introducing Prof. Govender and acknowledge the following for their support and background work for this public lecture: the corporate relations team, the college public relations team, the registrar's office, ICS, and if I've omitted anyone, my sincere apologies. Finally, and most importantly, congratulations once more to Professor Irene Govender on behalf of the College of Law and Management Studies. Thank you for your significant impact in academia. May you continue to inspire others to greatness. Colleagues, with these few words, I again thank you all for joining us today in supporting and congratulating Professor Govender, and I now draw this public lecture to a close. I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon. Keep well. Thank you very much indeed.